choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
October 4th, 1957, 10:48 p.m. This is the time when the first artificial satellite would enter Earth's orbit, marking the beginning of a competition so ambitious it got mankind to the moon. Although both the US and Russia announced they would launch an artificial satellite, the Russians were the first to do it with Sputnik 1. Its only purpose was to transmit radio signals. Only a month later, they launched Sputnik 2, which carried the first animal in space, a dog named Laika. The Americans then launched Explorer 1, nearly 4 months after the Soviets did. Two years and over 5 failed attempts later, the Russians gained more progress with the first man-made object to reach the moon, a spacecraft named Luna 2. They also made some cool pics of its far side. Then the US did the same thing 5 years later, but what they didn't know is what the Soviets would have in store. April 12, 1961. This is the day when the first man would reach space, in a craft called Vostok 1, achieving 1 orbit around the Earth. 1 month after Gagarin reached space, Alan Shepard would become the first American to do it as well. At this point, the Soviets were a great deal ahead of the USA. Before the first man in space, Kennedy thought that space exploration was a waste of money, but it all changed after that, and if they wanted to show they were more capable, they had to do something big. JFK started pouring money into NASA, which then channeled it into programs, such as the Mercury program, which enabled John Glenn to be the first American to orbit the Earth. Then the Russians achieved the first spacewalk on Voskhod 2. After Mercury, the US made Project Gemini, so they could test space travel techniques for landing people on the moon. Both the Soviets and the Americans did a lot of stuff in this period, but I'm gonna fast forward to 1967, when the first Apollo mission would take place. Unfortunately, the crew was killed in an explosion. Skipping for all the not so important Apollo missions, the next notable step is Apollo 8. Basically, 3 astronauts left low Earth orbit, entered lunar orbit, circled the moon 10 times and came back unscathed. You may not know that this very known picture was taken from that spacecraft. Half a year later, on July 16, 1969, humankind landed on the moon. I'm not gonna go in depth with it, since you probably know the details. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped on the moon while Michael Collins stayed in orbit. After this, the competition died down. The Russians' attempt at a moon landing was a big failure. Weeks before the American success, their N-1 rocket suffered a significant explosion. They focused more on space stations, and they launched the first one, Salyut 1, in 1971. Then the US made their own station as well, Skylab 1. The two nations agreed upon a joint mission, where an Apollo craft would dock with a Soyuz. This happened on July 17, 1975. The crew exchanged gifts and shook hands, but the most important thing about this event is that this is when the space race would end for good. A lot of space travel achievements happened after that, such as the Space Shuttle program, which ended 10 years ago, the ISS in '98, or Voyager 1, the first man-made object to leave the solar system. But space exploration wouldn't be as competitive as it once was.